What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video. And today we're going to be talking about the latest installment into the Jurassic Park / Jurassic World franchise, just a few years after the supposed finale of the franchise. And that film is called Jurassic World Rebirth. Directed this time around by Gareth Edwards, this film is written by David Koepp and stars people like Scarlett Johansson, Mahershala Ali, Jonathan Bailey, Rupert and more. And before we get into my thoughts on the film, let's hear a word from today's sponsor. So you guys know that one of my favorite things to do in this world is go to the theater and watch some movies. But one of my favorite parts of that experience is going to the concession stand and getting a big old bucket of popcorn and putting that layer of salt and butter on top, shaking it up and chowing it down during the film. But there's nothing more disappointing than getting halfway through that bucket and realizing that those salt levels are not where you want them. And that's where the sponsor of today's video, Sprout, comes into play. It's the sprayable salt that's changing the game with 75% less sodium, but all of the flavor. Sprout is perfect for popcorn, wings, soft pretzels, and even when you're cooking dinner. Just spray and enjoy the taste without overdoing the salt. And the kind folks over at Sprout are offering my viewers 10% off of their purchase if you head on over to sprout.com and use promo code Perez at checkout. Again, head on over to sprout.com and use promo code PEREZ at checkout for 10% off of your order today. So what are you waiting for? Get your Sprout on. And a big thanks to those kind folks over at Sprout for sponsoring today's video. So here we are, just a few years after the release of Jurassic World Dominion, which, while it wasn't really praised by a lot of fans and critics, it was supposedly meant to be the end of the saga. All of the marketing leaned on that, and since then we have had the continuation of the franchise through the animated shows that are done by DreamWorks that release on Netflix, known as Camp Cretaceous and Chaos Theory, which I have been covering here on the channel over the course of the last few years. I've been a huge fan of what those shows have done, and I've argued that I think that those animated shows have done better in terms of character and story than the Jurassic World films did in their time. And I really enjoyed the first Jurassic World film. I thought it was a great return to the franchise, but I think it goes without saying that both Fallen Kingdom and Dominion were on the weaker side for the franchise for sure. But as somebody who grew up with the original trilogy of Jurassic Park films, and with the first film being in possibly my top 5 favorite films of all time, Jurassic Park means so much to me. So when I heard a new installment was coming out, while it immediately felt unnecessary, I was still excited to check it out. Then you add in the fact that you have Gareth Edwards as the director, who's done things like the 2014 Godzilla or Rogue One, a Star Wars story, or more recently The Creator, which is a film I really enjoyed. And you also have people like David Koepp returning as a writer who wrote the first Jurassic Park film, and you have Alexandre Desplat as the musical composer. You have a lot of really good pieces here that made me think, okay, this could be a good resurgence for the franchise, especially since the supposed finale in Dominion left people with a bit of a sour taste in their mouth. With all that said, let's get into what this film is all about, and then we'll get into my thoughts on the film. This time around, a covert ops team led by Zora, played by Scarlett Johansson, heads to a forbidden island to extract DNA from the last mega dinosaurs. When a civilian family finds themselves shipwrecked, though, both groups must survive encounters with mutated, abandoned species, including the terrifying six-limbed D-Rex, while uncovering the island's sinister secrets. I'll start this off by saying that when I heard that Gareth Edwards was attached to this film, I was incredibly excited. But one thing that not only myself, but many others started to kind of be worried about was the fact that from the date that they announced he was part of the franchise or part of the film up to when a trailer was released, it was a pretty short window of time, which led to a lot of people being concerned that maybe the turnaround was going to be fast. Maybe they were kind of throwing him onto a project that was already in development instead of him being able to kind of develop it from the ground up. Whatever the case may be, though, I was excited to see what he would bring to it because I like his style of directing. I usually love the cinematography of his films. I usually love the action set pieces of his films. And I think at times he could do really solid character work. But if there's one thing I know he can do is big spectacle monster action. And I'll start this off by saying that I think Jurassic World Rebirth has some great set pieces in here. There's some great action set pieces that feel like a big monster movie. And I'll say in general, as an action adventure film with monsters and big dinosaurs, I think that this film is enjoyable. I think there's plenty of fun to be had on that side of things. But does it work as a Jurassic Park sequel, as a Jurassic World installment? I'm a little torn on that side. What I'll start this off by saying is that the premise of this film is very familiar. You have Rupert Friend as a rich guy who works for a corporation who wants to get to a specific area that has these mega dinosaurs to extract DNA for them for a specific reason. Of course, he has all the money and he's the one that's essentially setting out for this expedition, so he ends up finding a top-tier group of mercenaries that include people like Scarlett Johansson and Mahershala Ali to go to this island to do this whole DNA extraction thing. And amidst all this, then you have Jonathan Bailey's character, who's the expert who knows so much about dinosaurs, but like we've seen before in many stories like this, he doesn't have the field experience. He doesn't have that, face-to-face contact with these dinosaurs. So they bring him along so that he can kind of give them some sense of expertise, but also so that he can be the character that you kind of see the wonder of the dinosaurs through, despite the scariness that's going on. And we've seen this premise done before. Rich guy pays off a bunch of mercenaries to go to a place, you have the one expert in the mix, and then you have the characters that seem like cannon fodder amidst it all that are just gonna die. You have the a-hole character who's incredibly cocky right from the second you meet him, only to know, yeah, that guy's gonna be taken out quickly. And amidst all this as well, one thing that definitely, I guess you could say, gives it its own identity is that you have a family of 4 who are shipwrecked, as I already mentioned in the synopsis, who end up finding themselves alongside this mercenary group who are on this expedition, who now are working to survive alongside one another. That's the general gist of the film, and so what I'll start this off by saying is it's very familiar. You've seen this premise done before. You've definitely seen this not only in the Jurassic Park franchise, but in other franchises in general. I would say that in a lot of ways, it reminded me of a blend of the second and third Jurassic Park films with a bit of its own little feel to it. And I gotta say, I was a little bit let down by the character work in this film. By the time I got to the end of the film, I can genuinely say I didn't really care for any of the characters, and I don't really think there's anybody that stands out, especially when it comes to our main characters. Scarlett Johansson, Jonathan Bailey, Mahershala Ali, all great actors, and I think that they all have moments in this film where they shine. I think they all have moments where they're charming, maybe you'll get a chuckle off of something that they said, or moments where you can see them kind of, just excited about the fact that they're part of a Jurassic World film. With that said though, there's also a part of it that kind of felt like they were sleepwalking through the film. It felt very much like they were just reading lines and just saying the lines, but it didn't necessarily feel like there was a lot of heart and soul to these characters, which was a bit of a bummer because when you look at the original film, of course, Ian Malcolm, Alan Grant, Ellie, like these are like really great characters in and of themselves, and I think it's why people love them so much. And even though people don't love Jurassic World Dominion, seeing them in it was top tier. And even with the more recent films, even though I don't think the characters are as iconic, I think Chris Pratt did a good job as a character of Owen Grady. Like you have this character who is memorable in the mix of these characters that we have. And so I think when I look at the characters here, I don't know that immediately Scarlett Johansson, Mahershala Ali, or Jonathan Bailey's characters, or any of the other side characters in the film have any sort of memorability to them. There isn't anything about them that I think is going to really make them stand the test of time alongside the other characters in the Jurassic Park franchise. And on top of that, I think the film just honestly suffers in a lot of ways narratively from a sense of convenience as well as a sense of familiarity and predictability. Ultimately, anybody that you think is going to die in this film is going to die. And usually when you think they're going to die is when they're going to die. And the characters that you think to yourself, they're going to get out of every situation completely unharmed, no problem. Those characters do end up getting out of every situation unharmed, no problem. It's a film that in a lot of ways just never had that shock and awe and surprise and never kept me really overly tense, even though you do have some fun action set pieces. I was never overly worried for our characters despite the high stakes, tension filled moments that they're in, which ultimately I think for me just made this film feel like a fun enough adventure action film set in the Jurassic Park franchise, but nothing that ever felt like it really lived up to the feeling that some of those previous installments have given us. Now, when it comes down to the musical score, Alexandre Desplat does a great job of leaning into the John Williams score while also doing something new. And the John Williams element of it, the iconic music from this franchise, is where I found myself the most conflicted because the music is beautiful, and it's in these moments where those themes play where I felt the movie wanted me to feel more than I actually did. In previous installments, and even some of my least favorite installments in the franchise, and even in the animated shows that I've already mentioned, when that music plays more often than not, it still is able to kind of resonate something in me. It still kind of makes me feel that sense of wonder, that awe amidst the craziness of Jurassic Park and all the dinosaurs and people dying. And I think with this film, oftentimes it felt like something that was tacked on, but that emotion and that soul wasn't there as much. Now, it might sound like I'm overly negative on the film, but what I will say is I still had fun watching the film. I found it to be an enjoyable monster dinosaur film, but as an installment into the Jurassic Park franchise, I just don't necessarily know that it necessarily soars to the same heights that certain installments in this franchise have. And it also starts in a way that kind of undoes the way that the last film ended. Now, some people might say, that's okay, I didn't like the last film. But in terms of continuity, when I think about sitting down and binging a franchise like this, if we get more films down the line and people want to catch up on these films, it's always frustrating to me when you have a film that kind of undoes what the last film does, because if you're sitting down and watching them right after one another, it makes you wonder, why did they do that? Why did they undo what the last film did? And in the sake of this film, it felt like it was undoing what the last film did at the end in terms of the wide scale, just dinosaurs everywhere in the world, simply to kind of restrict our storyline to a specific island to kind of give it that feel to the early days of the Jurassic Park franchise, which on one hand did work because you have great set design and locations that are used in practical ways, but on another hand just feels again like it's undoing something for the sake of just undoing it, and less so because it really elevates the material that we're seeing in this film in particular. With all that said, in terms of the action set pieces, I do think there's a lot of fun to be had. The visuals of the film are pretty solid, despite the fact that I'm really bummed that the Jurassic Park franchise has completely moved away from practical effects. While the Jurassic World films haven't had a lot of practical effects in general, I think that they have been able to lean into it at times. And I think that this film in particular, compared to all the Jurassic World films, definitely has a little bit more of an overarching, just heavy CG look to it. Everything about it feels very cartoony, even in comparison to the last three Jurassic World films. While those films definitely leaned into CGI, I think that the look of those films is a little bit more consistent with the original trilogy despite the lack of practical effects, whereas this one, there are certain dinosaurs that just look very cartoony, and that didn't necessarily ruin the film for me, but because this is an installment in a franchise that is so well known for its practical effects, it does make me wish that they had leaned heavier into those practical effects. And it's a shame that despite the fact that they're using practical locations and sets, that the dinosaurs just never have a moment to be practical. And when you look at those earlier films in the franchise, not to necessarily sit here and just compare, but the terror that you can see from the actors in these moments was so real and tangible because they are working off of something that's horrifying, that's coming at them, that's sitting there face to face with them. And that was something Steven Spielberg has always been great at when it comes down to his films. Look at Jaws as another great example. It's all about being able to put your actors in something that feels real and scary to get the most honest reaction. And I do think there were moments in this film, because it's so CG heavy, where it feels like some of the actors don't really fully know where to look. You know, sometimes if you look at their eye line versus where the dinosaur is, it isn't always perfect, you know, and that's just a bit of a gripe, you know, a bit of a gripe. Overall, I think that Jurassic World Rebirth is an unnecessary return to the franchise that undoes the ending of the last film, but has fun enough dinosaur action sequences that you can sit there and scarf down some popcorn and drink some soda and enjoy yourself. But ultimately, narratively, I have to be honest in saying that it feels predictable, it feels familiar, it feels generic, and it has some of the more forgettable characters that ultimately, in a lot of ways for me, made some of the most illogical choices throughout the course of the film that consistently made them unlikable. There are moments of charm, there are moments of humor, there are moments that you will like these characters, there are moments where you'll find yourself, you know, excited to see what's going to be happening next. I found the last 30-40 minutes to be the most locked in I was in on the movie. So in terms of just as an action monster movie, I think that Gareth Edwards definitely showed what he has here as a director. But when it comes down to narrative and something that's going to be memorable in terms of character or emotion, especially in a franchise that is so popular for that, I don't necessarily know that this film necessarily soars to those heights, despite the fact that I still enjoyed it as a fan of dinosaurs and as a fan of the Jurassic Park franchise. And any real disappointment you hear in my voice and in my review really comes from the fact that I love this franchise and I want nothing more for it to succeed. But I would genuinely say, if you're looking for much better Jurassic Park, Jurassic World storytelling in the modern day, Camp Cretaceous and Chaos Theory on Netflix, genuinely, while very much for kids, and you know, takes a little bit to get you into because it is for, you know, younger audience. As you get further into it, the stories get better and better, the characters get better and better developed, and ultimately, when I look at what they've done with the Jurassic Park franchise since the original three films, I think the animated shows have done it substantially better in terms of character, in terms of that awe, in terms of that whimsy, in terms of that feeling of also both being terrified by the dinosaurs, but also a sense of just like being so in awe of how beautiful the dinosaurs are in nature and all that. This film tries to have that feeling from time to time, but I don't necessarily know that it fully captured that for me, to the point where I walked out of the film feeling emotionally connected to the film. I liked it, I enjoyed watching it, I just didn't love it, and so that's a bit of a bummer for me, and I wish that I had cared more for the characters, and you know, that there was a little bit more of surprise throughout the course of the film, instead of my mind just pretty much guessing everything that was going to happen and it playing out exactly as I expected it to. And in a franchise that already has so many installments, it just begs the question, do we need an installment like this within the franchise? And with actors so good in the film, could they have done more? You know, could we have given them more meaty characters? And I think part of it really just comes down to the script. There's just lines of dialogue that made me wonder, like, why is that the line that these characters got? You know, like, why is this what they chose to go with for these characters? You know, it just surprised me a little bit. It made me want a little bit more from a lot of the different avenues on a narrative level. But as an action adventure movie with dinosaurs, it's fun, and it has a couple of moments that tie itself to the Jurassic Park franchise with some references, but ultimately outside of a couple of things of reference, it doesn't really feel like it's a film that really feels ingrained in the Jurassic Park franchise, other than it just telling us that it is. Outside of that, the last thing I want to mention is, of course, the big thing that they have shown in a lot of the marketing is the new mutant monster in this one, the new mutant dinosaur, and that is the D-Rex. And what I'll say is it's a cool looking monster. It's definitely the most mutated I think we've seen in any Jurassic Park thing ever. Of course, we've had, you know, blends of dinosaurs in the past. This one is just a full-on monster. It almost looks like an alien. Very much looks like the Rancor from Star Wars in a lot of ways. Also looks like something maybe out of Gears of War. It's definitely like a monster this time around. Less so of a dinosaur hybrid and more so of just like a flat-out monster. They tease it at the beginning, but it really isn't until the last like 20 minutes that it becomes like an integral piece of the film. And that was something that was also disappointing to me, because when you look at like the T-Rex in the original film or even the second film, it's a monster that is a looming threat throughout the course of the film. Same with the Spinosaurus in the third film, and then when you go to the Indominus Rex in Jurassic World or the Endoraptor, it just felt like some of these monsters were a little bit more of a threat throughout the film that ultimately come back in the end, whereas this one just felt like majority of its time was really kind of just meaty in the end part of the film. And I wish the D-Rex had been a bigger part and a bigger threat in the film, where it feels like there's like a final kind of escape or runaway or showdown with this monster at the end of the film. But more so, it just felt like the big bad at the end of the film, and that was a bit of a bummer for me. So as you can tell, I'm all over the place on this film. I do think there's fun to be had, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it. At the screening that I saw it at, which was the early AMC screen unseen, there were people who were laughing at certain jokes and people who were applauding at certain moments. So by no means do I think this is a film that's going to be disliked across the board. But based on some of the other reviews I've seen from some of my friends who are not in critics associations and didn't have to wait for embargo, it seems like the opinions are a little bit all over the place, and it doesn't seem like it's working for everybody 100%. But I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Are you a fan of this new film in the franchise? If you saw it, are you planning on checking it out? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.